The sound of the front door unlocking wasn't supposed to happen, at least not tonight. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, each second louder than the last, echoing through the silent mansion like a warning. Inside, shadows stretched across marble floors, and the fire in the living room crackled softly, unaware of the storm that had just walked through the door. Daniel Hargrove, the billionaire who owned everything in sight, stepped inside earlier than expected, his polished shoes barely making a sound. He wasn't meant to be home for another 3 days, but something felt off during his trip, a strange, persistent unease that refused to leave him alone. So he came back, without telling anyone. And now, as he took a few steps forward, something felt wrong. Then suddenly, a hand grabbed him. Not roughly, but urgently. A gloved hand, bright yellow against his dark blue suit, covered his mouth before he could even react. Stay quiet." The whisper was barely audible, trembling, desperate. Daniel froze. Behind him stood Maria, his maid. Her eyes were wide with fear, her breath uneven, her entire body tense like she was holding back something far bigger than herself. In that moment, Daniel realized this wasn't about surprise. This was about danger. Backhand index pointing right if you believe in kindness, second chances, and stories that touch the heart. Take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. You never know who might need to hear a story like this today. Daniel's heartbeat began to pound in his chest as Maria slowly removed her hand from his mouth, her fingers still trembling. He turned slightly, confusion and irritation flashing across his face, but the moment he saw fear in her eyes, something inside him shifted. Maria wasn't just scared. She was terrified, and not for herself. She gently pressed her hand against his shoulder, urging him to stay still. Her gaze flickered toward the hallway, toward the deeper parts of the house where the darkness seemed thicker, heavier. Daniel followed her eyes, and for the first time since entering his own home, he felt like a stranger inside it. This mansion built on wealth and power suddenly felt like a trap. He had spent years building his empire, long nights, ruthless decisions, sacrifices that cost him relationships, time, and pieces of his own humanity. He trusted very few people, and even those he trusted were kept at a distance. Maria was different, though. She had worked for him for 5 years. Quiet, hardworking, invisible in the way that people like him often overlooked. But she had always been kind, gentle, honest in a way that didn't belong in a house full of secrets. And now she was the only one standing between him and something he couldn't yet understand. Daniel leaned slightly closer, his voice low, controlled, but laced with urgency. "What's going on?" Maria didn't answer immediately. Instead, she swallowed hard, her eyes filling with tears she was trying desperately to hold back. Her voice, when it finally came, was barely more than a breath. "They're inside." Daniel's stomach dropped. The word "they" hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy with meaning. He had enemies. Of course he did. You don't build a billion-dollar empire without stepping on someone along the way. Deals gone wrong, partners betrayed, competitors crushed. He had always known that one day something like this might happen, but not here, not in his home. Maria took a shaky step back, glancing again toward the hallway. The firelight flickered across her face, revealing the depth of her fear. "I heard them talking," she whispered. "They've been here for hours. They didn't expect you back." Daniel's mind raced. Every instinct told him to act, to take control, to confront whatever threat had invaded his space. But something in Maria's voice stopped him. This wasn't a situation he could dominate with money or authority. This was something else, something dangerous. He slowly removed his jacket, his movements deliberate, silent. For the first time in years, Daniel Hargrove wasn't the billionaire in control. He was just a man trying to survive. Maria motioned for him to follow her, her steps careful as she led him away from the open living room and toward the narrow service hallway used by staff. It was a part of the house he had rarely entered, a hidden network of passages that existed behind the polished perfection of his world. As they moved, Daniel's mind began to piece things together. The unease he felt on his trip, the sudden decision to return, the timing, it wasn't coincidence. Something or someone had drawn him back. Maria stopped suddenly, pressing herself against the wall. Daniel mirrored her movement, his breath shallow as he listened. Voices, faint but unmistakable. They were coming from his office, his private office. The one place in the house that held everything, Documents, accounts, secrets that could destroy empires if they fell into the wrong hands. Daniel's chest tightened. This wasn't a random break-in, this was targeted. Maria looked at him, her eyes pleading for him to understand the seriousness of the situation. And in that moment, Daniel realized something else. She could have run. She could have left the house, called the police, saved herself, but she didn't. She stayed. For him, that realization hit harder than anything else. For years, he had walked past her without truly seeing her. She was part of the background of his life, someone who ensured his world ran smoothly without ever stepping into it. And yet, when danger came, she was the one who stood her ground. Not his security team, not his business partners, not the people who praised him when he succeeded. Did her. A maid the world would never notice. And suddenly, Daniel felt something unfamiliar rise in his chest. Guilt. Maria gently touched his arm again, pulling him back to the present. Her lips moved silently, forming words he could barely make out. "We have to be careful." Daniel nodded. For once, he wasn't giving the orders. He was following them. They moved deeper into the hidden corridor, the sounds of the intruders growing clearer with each step. Snippets of conversation reached them. Fragments about files, about money, about something that sounded dangerously like blackmail. Daniel's mind sharpened. This wasn't just about theft, this was about destroying him. He clenched his fists, the familiar fire of determination beginning to rise. But this time, it wasn't fueled by ambition. It was fueled by survival and by something else. A quiet, growing respect for the woman beside him. Maria paused near a small utility door that led to the back of the house. She looked at him, her expression torn between fear and resolve. "We can get out this way," she whispered, a call for help. Daniel hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to protect what was his, to fight back, to confront the threat head-on. But then he looked at Maria again, at the fear she was carrying, at the courage it took for her to stay, and for the first time in a very long time, Daniel made a different kind of decision. He chose to listen. They slipped out into the cold night, the door closing silently behind them. The air hit Daniel's face like a shock, grounding him in the reality of what was happening. His mansion, his fortress, was no longer safe. But as he stood there, breathing in the crisp night air, he realized something even more important. Safety wasn't in walls or wealth, it was in people. And tonight, the person who had saved him wasn't someone powerful or influential. It was someone kind, someone brave. Someone he had overlooked for far too long. Hours later, as flashing lights surrounded the estate and authorities moved in, Daniel stood beside Maria, watching as the situation unfolded. The intruders were caught. The danger was contained. But something inside Daniel had changed, irreversibly. He turned to Maria, really looking at her this time, not as an employee, but as a person, as someone who had risked everything. And in that moment, Daniel Hargrove understood something that all his money had never been able to teach him. True loyalty cannot be bought. It is earned through kindness, respect, and humanity. And he had a lot to make up for. Backhand index pointing right if this story is touching your heart so far. Take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. Your words might... In the days that followed, Daniel began to rebuild, not just his security systems or his business defenses, but his relationships. He started noticing the people around him, listening, understanding. He changed, not overnight, but slowly, genuinely. Maria was no longer invisible. She became a symbol of something far greater, a reminder that even in a world driven by power and wealth, it is compassion that truly defines a person. And sometimes the quietest voices carry the strongest courage. Backhand index pointing right before we reach the ending, I have a special request. Comment a kindness always wins if you believe small acts of courage can change lives. Because they can. And they did. That night didn't just save Daniel's life. It gave him a new one. Backhand index pointing right if this story moved you even a little. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps bring more meaningful stories like this to life. And you never know whose heart it might reach next. The night the mansion fell silent again should have felt like an ending. But for Daniel Hargrove, it felt like the beginning of something he didn't yet understand. The sleep didn't come easily after the police left. The flashing lights faded, the officers disappeared, and the intruders were taken away, but the echo of that night stayed behind, lingering in the walls, in the shadows, in his thoughts. Daniel sat alone in his study as dawn slowly crept through the tall windows, painting the room in soft gold. The same office that had almost been violated hours earlier now felt different. Not because anything had changed physically, but because he had. For years, this room had been his sanctuary, a place of control, power, strategy, but now it felt like a reminder. A reminder of how close he had come to losing everything, and, more importantly, of who had stood by him when it mattered. Maria, her name stayed in his mind like a quiet echo. He hadn't spoken to her much after everything ended. She had disappeared into her small quarters, likely exhausted, likely overwhelmed. And Daniel, he didn't know what to say. Thank you felt too small. Sorry felt too late, and yet he knew he had to try. The sun had fully risen by the time Daniel finally stood up, his body heavy with the weight of reflection. He walked out of his office, through the long hallway, past the polished floors that suddenly felt less important than they ever had before. For the first time, he turned toward the staff wing, a place he had never truly entered, not out of cruelty, but out of indifference. It simply hadn't been part of his world. Until now, the hallway was quieter here, simpler. No grand paintings, no expensive decor, just plain walls and closed doors. Realized behind him, Daniel paused in front of one door, Maria's. His hand hovered for a moment before he knocked gently. There was a pause. Then, slowly, the door opened. Maria stood there, her face pale but calm, her eyes still carrying the exhaustion of the night before. She looked surprised to see him. More than surprised, almost uncertain. As if she didn't expect him to ever stand here. Daniel felt that unfamiliar tightness in his chest again. Regret, he took a breath, steadying himself. For once in his life, he wasn't speaking as a businessman, or a billionaire, or a man used to being listened to. He was just a man trying to say something that mattered. His voice, when it came, was quieter than usual. "I owe you my life." Maria blinked, clearly not expecting those words. She looked down for a moment, almost uncomfortable, as if she didn't know how to accept something so heavy. "I just did what anyone would do," she replied softly. But Daniel shook his head. No," he said more firmly this time. "Not anyone." And that was the truth. Anyone could have run. Anyone could have stayed silent. Anyone could have chosen safety over courage. But she didn't. And that changed everything. The silence between them stretched for a moment, not awkward, but full of something unspoken, a shift in balance. A recognition that something important had happened. Something that couldn't simply be brushed aside. Daniel looked around her small room. Simple furniture, minimal belongings, a life so different from his own it almost felt like another world. And yet, standing here, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, perspective. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly, though his tone wasn't commanding. It was reflective, a not like this. Maria frowned slightly confused. "I don't understand." Daniel hesitated, choosing his words carefully. This wasn't about making a grand gesture. It wasn't about charity. It was about fairness. Someone like you, someone who has that kind of courage, that kind of integrity. He continued, his voice steady. "You deserve more than just being unseen." Unseen. Maria's eyes softened, but there was something else there too. "Strength, respect doesn't come from position," she said gently. "It comes from how people treat each other." The words hit Daniel harder than anything else. Because she was right, and deep down he knew it. For years he had built a world where respect was tied to wealth, status, influence, but in one night, Maria had shown him something completely different. Real respect is human, not transactional, not conditional. Human, Daniel nodded slowly, absorbing her words. "Oh, right," he admitted, "and I haven't always treated people the way I should have." That was the closest he had ever come to an apology like this, and it mattered. Maria gave a small, understanding smile, not one of judgment, but one of quiet acceptance, as if she could see the change in him and believed it. That belief, more than anything, made Daniel want to be better, not for his reputation, not for his image, but for himself, and for the people around him. Days turned into weeks, and slowly the mansion began to feel different. Not because of new security systems or stricter protocols, though those were in place. But because of something deeper, Daniel changed how he interacted with people. He learned names, he listened, he acknowledged. Small things that to him once seemed insignificant, but to others meant everything. And Maria, she was no longer just the maid. She became someone Daniel trusted, not because of her role, but because of who she was. One afternoon, as the sun poured into the living room where everything had changed, Daniel sat across from her, not as an employer, but as someone seeking advice. "I've spent my whole life building something," he said, his tone thoughtful. "But I'm starting to realize I don't know if I built it the right way." Maria looked at him, her expression calm. "Oh, maybe it's not about how you built it," she said. "Maybe it's about what you do with it now." That simple sentence carried more wisdom than any boardroom discussion Daniel had ever been part of, and in that moment, he made a decision. Not a business decision, a life decision. He began investing not just in companies, but in people, scholarships, community programs, fair wages for his staff, opportunities for those who had never been given a chance. It wasn't about fixing the past, it was about shaping the future. And every step of the way, Maria remained a quiet but powerful presence, never asking for recognition, never seeking attention, but always reminding him, in the simplest ways, what truly mattered. The fire burned gently, casting warm light across the space. But this time, it didn't feel like a place of fear. It felt like home, not because of the walls, but because of the people within them. He glanced toward the hallway where Maria walked by, carrying on with her work as she always had. But now, she wasn't invisible. She never would be again. Daniel smiled slightly, a quiet sense of peace settling in his chest. That night had taken something from him. His illusion of control, my illusion of control. But it had given him something far greater: understanding. Gratitude, humanity, and sometimes losing what you think matters is the only way to find what truly does. Backhand index pointing right if this story touched your heart. Take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Stories like this remind us that even the smallest act of courage can change someone's life forever. Because in the end, it wasn't the billionaire who saved the night. It was the maid who refused to stay silent, and that made all the difference.